Good morning and welcome to Mecca Live, making engaging community connection accessible here on Tuesday, November 17th, 2020. This week, we have a theme for both today and Thursday. And the theme is when safe places are unsafe. Today, we're going to talk about microaggressions at church. And then on Thursday, we are going to talk about organization mission statements, behaviors, and bylaws. So today, I want to take a few minutes and just because that's a lot. um, when we think about microaggressions, and then when we think about church, that's a lot. Like putting those together. When we think about safe places and what that means to be safe, there's a lot of things that intersect there and go hand in hand, but then kind of carry. So when we think about that, I want to a couple of things I want to say before I get right into the topic, and that is this is specifically designed to address when we feel safe, the places we tend to feel safe, how we feel safe, and then how we navigate when safe places are no longer safe. How we know, what happens when it dawns on us and we realize that, I'm not really safe anymore. Like, because when we think of safe places, we think of areas and environments and people where we can let our hair down, like where we feel like there's not going to be any reprisal for being authentically who I am, right? So when I come home, I may take my makeup off, I may let my hair down, and I'm okay to do that because the atmosphere and the environment is different, and I'm safe to do so. And then what do I do? What are the things that lead me to the awareness that I'm no longer safe in this environment? And then also, how do I navigate that? Now, what do I do? Now that I recognize it, I see it for what it is, what happens next, right? So, this live is designed to bring awareness to the times and spaces and what it may look like, and how to recognize when we don't feel safe in areas where we are told we're safe or we've been safe before, or that are earmarked for areas of non judgment, compassion, things of that nature. So, first, let me say this: even though the subtitle is Microaggressions at Church, this is not denominational or denomination specific. So this has nothing to do with specific denominations, and there's not going to be any highlights or lowlights, as it may be, regarding any specific churches or things of that nature, or spiritual settings, because some of our organizations are view themselves and promote themselves more as a spiritual environment and not necessarily a church. So I want to make that distinction, but also include the fact that neither one are being highlighted specifically. This is just as it relates to safe places, and churches were one of the ones that I decided to discuss first. Nor is this live anti-church, right? So it's not, or anti, spiritual organization or whatever the case may be. It's neither one of those. This is specifically relating to safety, feeling safe, and then identifying when we don't feel safe, and then also what is a microaggression and how does that look? What does that look like at church, right? And I'll just do a spoiler right off rip. Microaggressions don't change clothes. They may come in different ways, but the definition of a microaggression doesn't change to fit the environment. So a microaggression that I may notice at work is still a microaggression, even if it happens inside the church. So if I'm at work and a coworker, there's an exchange and there's a microaggression toward or discriminating against me, if that same coworker and I go to the same church or the same spiritual organization and the same exchange takes place, it's still a microaggression. So there's the spoiler. But let's just get right into it. And let's start with the safe piece. So think for a few, where do you feel safe and why is that? So when you think of safety and that you feel safe, what does that even mean? So what does it feel like? What does it look like? What does safe mean to you? Because generally speaking, when I talk to people and when we talk about safe spaces and understand that, my background is mental health, so mental health and substance abuse and trauma informed care. So when we think about safe, from my background, when I hear safe, I think safe across all the dimensions. So spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. Safe from risk, safe from harm, safe from danger, protected, right? So safe just in a general sense and inside the context of this live, free from harm, free from injury, free from risk of harm or injury, free from danger. So when going forward inside this live, when I say safe, that's what I mean. Free from harm, free from injury, free from risk of any of the three, free from danger. And inside and add to that in the context of this live, free from harm, risk, danger, or injury across spirituality, across mental health and emotion, physical, across the board. Okay, so that's the context. But then, sometimes that term, that phrase microaggression sometimes is elusive for some of us. And for many reasons, right? A lot of times it's by design. A lot of times, the definition and what microaggression means has been misassociated, meaning people will use it in a way that not only is incorrect, but designed to provide misinformation. And so when I asked people, and I just asked random people, I asked people, I said, when you hear microaggression, what do you think of? I think of low-key racism. Okay. There's some truth to that. There's some truth to that. But that on its own is kind of an insular association, an insular definition, and that doesn't properly qualify microaggressions across the board. So let's stay with that. The majority of the responses I received when I asked, about microaggressions were having to do with race or prejudice along the lines of race, and discrimination, because it is discrimination along the lines of race. But let's microaggressions is a much larger suitcase. It just so happens that more often with the people that I discussed, when they read about or learned about or heard about microaggressions or an incident or a situation that involves microaggressions, the situation centered around race. The microaggressions centered around race. But so that's their point of reference. So let me just be clear about that. But it's subtle. That's what the low key came in. It's subtle. It may be intentional. It may be unintentional. Sometimes people are just saying and doing stuff that they hear and see as they grew up in their socialization, whatever the case may be. And I'm not dismissing it. I'm just saying that there's this width and breadth of where microaggressions fit. And that's why the suitcase is so large, because sometimes it's as subtle and it's a nuance that, I never thought of it like that, all the way to, she really said that. Yeah. So it's a slight, it's sometimes it's a slip of tongue, sometimes it's not, and it demonstrates, it's a behavior that may or may not include language. And I'll give you some examples, but I want to say this part first. It's a behavior that may or may not include language that communicates a bias, right? It has a history. Microaggressions historically target or are framed around groups that are historically marginalized, stigmatized, and relegated to the outskirts, right? So the outskirts of, accepted society or accepted groups or accepted populations. And so again, I want to be clear. Sometimes it's moreover, it's subtle, but sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes it's unintentional. It's a slight, it's behavior that sometimes has language, but not always, that is commonly around the lines in the circles of race, but not always, right? So this marginalized group, now that I've mentioned marginalized groups, what kind of groups come to mind? Groups of people, when I say marginalized. And you can look at, as it relates to, I'm not just going to give you the general ones, right? As it relates to race, as it relates to sex, as it relates to gender, as it relates to age, ... And those are the biggies when you look at discrimination laws, right? And it goes beyond that, it goes into medical discrimination and things along those lines. But these groups and these groups and populations that are historically or have been historically marginalized, that have been historically stigmatized for whatever reason, along the lines of, like I mentioned before, race, gender, sex, blah 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 blah. These little quips and these little So here's a behavior one, and this is a common one. And I'm trying to pick common ones so that um, they it resonates more and we can keep the conversation moving. Um, so I wanted to be clear about that because I don't want it to come across like I'm honing in on one group. I'm going to share this example because it's one we hear a lot, and it's one that I've experienced quite often. You go into a store and you notice someone following you. That's a behavior. There's no, you know, most of the time with me, it when it's happened to me, it there was no words communicated. There was no exchange of conversation initially, if at all. It's just I noticed, okay, I saw you when I walked in. I know that you work here because you have the whatever, like a name tag, or if there's like some kind of identifying garment, it may be a vest or a work shirt or whatever. And so, but you're not doing nothing. How come every time I look back, you there? The funny one, this is a side note. I remember going into one store many years ago, and when I would look back, all of a sudden they were straightening out stuff. I'm like, you obvious, right? And so, without casting judgment, that's an example of a microaggression in behavior where there's no language, right? No spoken language. And let me be clear, there are times when I've asked, excuse me, I notice everywhere I go, am I just in your inventory path, or no, we just had a couple of blah blah blah, or somebody came in that looked like you. Oh, okay, because I'm feeling kind of, I'm not used to people being behind me, and that's kind of a thing for me. And usually when I've chosen to speak on that, it ends up being a discussion like, I'm so sorry, like we just have to do it because blah blah blah. This is what we do. We follow because things have been missing, and we follow everybody. Okay, that may or may not be true. But I wanted to be clear that there are times when I have spoken and I have said something, and to gain clarity. One time it was this just happened. These three aisles have items that it was back when the what were people buying over the counter and abusing? It wasn't cough medicine, it was something. And it was like there's three aisles of things that people were taking and whatever. And so, and then there were times when they just didn't respond. At one time, the person just walked away. Or if you're walking down the street and then someone looks at you and deliberately crosses to the other side or moves their kid or some stuff. I don't know. Those are examples of nonverbal. But when we think about things that people say, and again, I'll use myself as an example because I want to be sure that it doesn't come across like I'm highlighting or casting shade specifically on one group. So in, I think it was 2010, somewhere in there, I decided to stop perming my hair. And so I would have braids or I would have extensions, either braided into my hair or whatever. And then I would take it down and my hair would be in its natural state. And people would say that I didn't know. And I think the overarching, the extra part that chafes is when it's somebody you don't know, where people have this sense of familiarity where they're just going to come up to you and say something. And to come up to me and say good morning, that's different. But to come up to me and say something about my person or something that in some way would resonate with race or sex or age or gender, and I don't know you, we need to be practically familiar for us to have that conversation. And even then, there are even people inside my close circles where I don't. That's not anything that I feel is appropriate. But anyway, people will come up to me and, oh my goodness, your hair, like it was so long yesterday. Okay. Or I didn't recognize you. Your hair is different. Okay. to the point where, and this would happen a lot at work. Um, once, and I guess because I can see hair throwing you, I can see the style of the cut or the color, being like, oh, shoot, your hair changed. I get that, but not to recognize me at all. Or people coming up to me to touch my hair. I can't tell you how many times I have the, because you don't just come up to someone to touch them. I mean, that could be considered harassment, yes? That could be considered something else, right? Like, we don't always know where people are coming from. Somebody may have history of someone touching them, or maybe they've been attacked in the past, and that could be a trigger. And excuse me, are we related? So those are physical behaviors. But then the comments, your hair looks so nice for it to be natural. So you may hear that and be like, well, maybe they just meant. That's what I mean by the subtle. That's what I mean by the subtle. Like, well, I never thought of it like that. Exactly. What's this? I said something in the beginning when I was talking about the populations and marginalized groups. I said a word that started with an H. Historically marginalized, historically stigmatized. And inside my ethnic group, there are things that are historic, that has historical context in the frame and in the context of discrimination and slander and things of that nature. Generally, it's my facial features for my ethnic group. Generally, it's my hair, and blah 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 blah. I can keep going. So there are ways to ask the question. There are ways to have this kind of conversation without being low key, intentional, unintentional, subtle, whatever, communicating this bias. Because the only way I'm going to know if I'm communicating a bias is for me to understand what bias means and for me to be familiar with my values and my beliefs. Because just because I was raised in a household or an environment or in a community where certain things were common knowledge or common beliefs doesn't mean that they are okay. Doesn't even mean that they're factual. That's where the critical thinking piece comes in. And if we don't have these conversations about critical thinking, just because we've done it this way, is that the best way to go? Does that resonate with what your beliefs and your values are? If not, what you gonna do? Are you gonna end up reshaping that? Are you gonna look at it for what it is? Are you gonna do due diligence and understand how that came to pass? Because sometimes, generally, something happens, right? There's a reason for how the belief began. Sometimes it's rooted completely in truth. Sometimes it's truth with my emotion. Sometimes it's truth with a little bit of history, with a little bit of emotion, and then how I interpreted that. So getting to the bottom of where this all started and why it resonates the way it resonates with me. And that means that when someone says something and I take offense or I'm taken aback by it, and Zinga needs to do due diligence and say, okay, why did it bother me? Oh, because it reminded me of this. Or because that's not even true. So it's incumbent upon me to continue to explore my bias, to continue to explore my privilege and blah, 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 blah. And understand, when I say privilege, there's different contexts. Sociologically, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how does this resonate with me and why? Because sometimes I could have misinterpreted it. And now I'm offended because I was misinterpreted. But the responsibility to speak responsibly, the responsibility of the one communicating, when I was in kindergarten, they used to say, think before you speak. Why do we stop that once we get a certain age? Back to microaggressions at church. Let's get back on topic. Why this topic? Why when safe places aren't safe as a theme, and why the topic microaggressions at church? Because right now, if I just focus on 2020, if I just focus on this year, we have seen, we have heard different populations, different areas, different organizations, different parties discussing how they don't feel safe. Moreover, I've heard more conversations and more comments of not feeling safe across more groups and populations in 1 year than I've heard in the majority of my breathing years. We had the protests, and we still do, as it relates to those in positions of power mistreating people, the ones that are identified to keep us safe. We have people in different capacities along the continuum of the impact of COVID-19, whether they're at work, maybe they don't feel economically safe. Maybe they don't feel medically safe. Maybe their medical coverage and their medical health is in a situation of peril, or in this situation of uncertainty, because we don't know which way, one, the pandemic's going to go, what's going to become of our healthcare system. We have parents that had to send their kids back to school, and they didn't feel safe. I could keep going. We're living in this time where there's so many things impacting our sense of safety. And that's why I took the time initially to explain, in the context of this live, with the basic definition of safe: protection from harm, injury, danger, or threat of the three. And I added a subtext caveat that it would also include, that to apply that definition to spiritually safe, emotionally safe, mentally safe, and physically safe. And when we think of church, we think of, that's where I go to get rejuvenated, or your spiritual environment. That's where I go to be fed my spirit. Whatever's happening or has gone on throughout this week or this month, this is my base. This is where I come and I'm fed. If it's the word, or if it's my belief systems, or if it's the music, or just being around people that believe the same way that I believe, this is like where I come to just take it all in, and I'm ready to face another week or another day, or however the case may be, right? Generally, these churches and or spiritual environments have some sort of hierarchy, in the sense of how it's run, who's in charge, who's the go-to for different aspects of support and just the program, right? But additionally, generally, our churches and our spiritual organizations are founded or based upon some form of belief system. A lot of times the belief systems are predicated upon some kind of script, whether it's a book with the tenets, if it's the Bible, if it's written word from the person that started, or the being that started the organization, the church, or the spiritual program, whatever that case may be. There's usually some form of hierarchy, and then something on which this denomination or this church or this spiritual organization rests. That's the foundation of the group, the organization, and also the belief system. I'm saying that on purpose, because a lot of times when we are looking at these microaggressions, if this is a safe space, that means that the boundaries that keep me mentally, the boundaries that keep me physically, the boundaries that keep me emotionally, and the boundaries that keep me spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically safe. I was missing one. I couldn't remember which one it was. Are fortified. It's a different element of safety. And generally, when we think of church, and we think of spirituality, we think of this part, the emotion and the spirit part, right? And if I'm going someplace where that's going to be taken seriously, then just loose logic, rudimentary logic, then all the other aspects of who I am will be safe, because this is at the heart of me. My spirituality is at the heart of me. My emotions are like, right there, right? So if this is the part of me that's being fed, and this is a safe place and a safe space, then I'm safe completely. And oftentimes that's the interpretation. That's the expectation. But often, more often than not, that is what's said. That's how these, a lot of times, our spiritual places in our churches are promoted to be a safe place. You can come here if you're weary, tired. What am I communicating? Vulnerable. Vulnerable. We don't go to the hospital when we're feeling good. We go when something's wrong. When we're not up to our best, and we need to understand what's happening with us. We go to our safe places, to stay safe. We go to these places to be rejuvenated, to get support, or to support. But what happens when those safe places aren't safe anymore? What happens when you go to church, or you go to your spiritual organization, or place of worship, or whatever that, however the phrase that fits your belief system, and how you find your spirituality, whatever that word is, or the best representation of where you go and what you believe. What happens when you go there and it's no longer safe? And how do you know? How do you know? A lot of times we go places, and as it relates to spirituality or worship, there's a suspension of belief, right? And I'm not talking about faith. I'm not talking about believing what I can't see, because that's faith. That's just basic. I mean, faith is way deeper than that. But my point is, a lot of times we there are these spiritual organizations and churches and belief systems that require you to suspend your critical thinking, or suspend your belief, and just accept. Sometimes we have groups, and sometimes it's not so much the organization as much as it is people inside the organization. But my point is, when you encounter a group or organization, or a church or denomination or whatever, that requires rote acceptance, rote behavior, rote compliance, or the dogma or the tenets teach that we just do that. If you're okay with that, if you have enough information, you feel like that's okay, no harm, no foul. But if you have cause for pause, if you have a mind that needs to understand all the pieces, then honor that, is what I'm trying to say. If you are a type of person that needs to understand, don't suspend that completely. There will be things that are not going to be crystal clear. I get that, especially when we think about spirituality and worship, and the things beyond the realm of our five senses, in and of themselves, right? I get that. But my point is, when we're talking about how do I know where I feel safe, when I feel safe, how do I know if this environment really is what I need for my spirit? Listen to yourself. And that doesn't mean indulge the areas. If you're a skeptic, I'm not saying indulge that. What I'm saying is pay attention. Continue to critically think. Be mindful of the things, of your values and beliefs. And does this place and does this thing completely resonate? Because in so doing, if you're honest with yourself and you're doing this work, excuse me, where you're exploring your biases, that's why I started the way I did. And you're looking at why you think the way you think, and how come that affected me this way? Did that really bother me, or was I'm irritated about this? Because I know when I have a headache or some kind of discomfort, not everything, but things that would not normally get on my nerves, kind of tend to get on my nerves. When I'm in pain, it changes the paradigm a little bit. So spending that time to understand who you are and how you work and how you tick, that's how some people change denominations. They realize, okay, I understand this, I believe this, but that resonates more with who I know myself to be, right? So that's where you start with you. What are the things that are important to me? What are the things that resonate with me? What are the things that, what are deal breakers, right? With my values and my belief system, how does this jive? Does this make sense, right? And then go from there. But at the heart of safety, in the sense of a church or spiritual organization, are three things: dignity, respect, compassion. Is what I'm about to say even if it's the truth, will this remove that person's dignity or challenge it or threaten it? Is this a demonstration of respect? Can I communicate this and communicate compassion? Simple terms. Would I want them to say that to me? I know what I'm trying to say, but I want it to come out so that it makes sense. I know what I'm trying to say, but I want it to come out so it's not offensive. I know what I'm trying to say, and they only know me this much. So how can I say what I'm thinking without insinuating some sort of familiarity that we don't have, so that I'm not damaging boundaries, right? Because I've experienced that in many different churches. Hey, how you doing? Come give me a hug. Wait, whoa. I know in church y'all hug and touch each other. I don't like that so much. I'm not talking about me, I'm just saying in general. Whoa, or you'll be in church. Go ahead and grab your neighbor's hand. No, I don't feel safe. There may be a reason. Maybe I don't like being touched because something happened, right? Maybe I just don't like touching folks. Maybe I don't want to turn to my neighbor and talk to my neighbor. Maybe I came to listen I don't want the interaction when I'm sitting and listening to you, and maybe that's just my personality. Maybe I'm that person, but isn't that person welcome to church? This is why the topic and why now, for many reasons. One, not everybody's the same, but there's almost an expectation when you walk through the church doors that it's okay for people to come up and hug you. It's okay for people to shake your hand and for you to talk to people. It's okay for your boundaries to become a little loose. Loosen up tight. Those boundaries are kind of tight because you're out in the world, right? But loosen them up when you're in church. But what if you don't want them to be loose? And then blah, blah, blah. Oh, microaggressions. Let's get into them. So the main reason why I wanted to have this conversation is because of the sphere of influence. Generally speaking, when you stand up to speak, many people will be like, okay, so you're standing up to speak, which means you're some sort of expert, right? You've been chosen or you're designated to speak because you have some type of knowledge. You are qualified in some capacity. Otherwise, you wouldn't be standing there talking. That's not always the case. But a lot of people will listen, and then there's a suspension of belief. Because you're there, you must have something to share. You must know what you're talking about. You must be right. And that's not always the case. And so people that take that sphere of influence seriously, and I'm just talking about standing before you. I'm not talking about leaders of the organization or the church or whatever, because that's another level of accountability. But in this sphere of influence, a lot of times if someone in a certain position or someone stands up to speak, their words are taken as truth. I'm going to take that, and I'm going forward with this information that I received from the person that stood there and spoke to me. They may be telling the truth. What I do, I check what people say. And I do that for several reasons. One, because I want to make sure I understand the whole thing. My father used to say, if you read a verse, read the verses before it and the verses after it. And that was a slick way for him to say, read the whole chapter, because it gives you the context, right? And we all have our own story. The thing about, if you don't hear anything else, the thing about microaggressions is that it takes a piece of someone's story and misrepresents it. It insinuates a piece of someone's story and misrepresents it. That's the biggest thing. And and it's not to say that I haven't and or will never speak out of turn or offend someone with something that I'm saying, but that I think about what I'm saying before I say it. And even if it's still offensive, I'm taking inventory. You can tell when you said something that didn't sit right with somebody else. Something happens here. And it's not always a face like that, but some usually around the eyes or, well, now I'm getting into another topic. You can usually tell when you've said something that offended someone. I'm sorry, did I say that wrong? I didn't mean, this is what I meant, right? Think it through. I remember when I went to high school and I had come from Washington, D.C. to a very, very rural area of Maryland that when we moved into our community, we were one of two families of color in all the houses around us. Two. And let me be clear, this family saw us, hey, I saw you, how you doing? We should talk. And they began to explain to us where to and where not to go at certain times of the son's position. Why am I sharing this? Because I remember it was my junior or senior year, and I think it was, I don't remember if it was my junior or senior, it was one of those. And I was at my locker, and these, I want to say they were freshmen, were around the corner, and they were peeking around the corner. I would look, and they went, I'm thinking, knuckleheads. I kept going, I'm getting what I'm doing. They walking, I would look up, and they would be like, and I could hear them, no, you ask her. No, you ask her. No, I'm. So now I'm like, okay, what are we doing now? And it kept getting closer and closer and closer. And I was like, I don't know what I did. Just something goofy, boom, or something. And they're like, and I'm like, what do you want to ask me? No, she wanted, it's okay. And ever since I asked questions all the time coming up. And I used to get in trouble for it because when I grew up, you didn't ask questions. And I wasn't asking questions to be insubordinate. I was asking questions because I wanted to understand, right? So questions, and even my whole life, I don't mind questions. Because to me, questions do two things. Questions neutralize the situation. If you're not questions that are not set up questions, but questions. Two things for me it does. It neutralizes the situation. So now we can exchange information. And it allows the other person to see where you're coming from. Because a lot of times our questions will, let me see, how do I say it? Our questions will demonstrate or create a pathway for us to understand where their mind is, right? And so that to me is an invitation to collaboration. Understand again, I'm not talking about the setup questions. I'm gonna ask her this, so she says that's not got it, right? But when people are like, it takes courage to ask questions. Think about it. And I'm gonna tell you the question they asked me. That took courage. That's why we were hiding behind the wall. But anyway, I was like, ask the question. The worst thing that'll happen is I'll tell you I'm not gonna answer it. And they were like, and I just saw relief. Okay, and they were like, okay, how do you get your hair to do that? Was that a microaggression? Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Nope. They had a question. And they were not coming for me. And they were afraid to ask me. And I said, what do you mean? And she was so cute. I can see her face. I can't remember her name. And she had this accent from, it was in West Virginia. Because a lot of the students that weren't from Maryland came from Pennsylvania, where the school was located. Some people came from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, whatever. Anyway, she said, well, and remember, this is the 80s. Let me be clear. There you have an image. She said, for our hair, because she was white, for our hair to stay in one spot, we have to spray hairspray. But you don't have to do that. Like, I can tell you don't have hairspray in your hair. And I explained it to her. And I said, well, we have different textured hair. And here's how it works. And then they were like, wow, that's so cool. That was the end of it. Thank you. Walked away. And I told them, I was like, if you ever have any questions, you can ask me. Because I feel like that takes away. Bias has no real place if I'm asking questions and I'm getting the answers I need, and I'm being authentic in my questions, and I'm being, transparent in my answers. It really doesn't. And to me, that's the best way to confront bias. And that's the best way to confront stereotypes, is to ask questions and have this collaboration. And when I said, okay, I'm gonna step outside of myself to listen and answer this question. And she said she's going to step outside of her question itself to ask the question. And so we met. We create this space where it's neutral, and we had that conversation. That's different than you walking up to me and putting your hands in my hair. Don't just touch me. I was the same. I'm the same way with my hair as I was when I was pregnant. I don't know you. Don't touch my stomach. If you were not pregnant, I came up to touch your stomach, what would happen? Exactly. I'm the same person. All right. So sphere of influence, truth and belief are not always, they don't always have a mutual relationship. Because sometimes I can believe things that are not true. And the truth is the truth, whether you believe it or not. Other piece, this belief behavior. I believe a certain way and I act a certain way. I think that you are a threat. I believe you're a threat, so my behaviors are going to become protective, even when they don't have to be. I.e., follow me around the store, crossing the street, clutching your purse, moving your children out the way, hiding your valuables because you saw me. If you just saw me steal something, I get that. But just because you have a belief system that tells you that I'm a threat, or tells you that I'm a physical threat or a thief threat, and then you behave accordingly. That's what we're talking about. When we look at church and these safe places and spiritual environments, there are songs that are sung that talk about equality. They talk about us all being the same. And then from the pulpit, we hear the LGBTQIA community disparaged. Why? We hear different documents and doctrines and prophets and prophetess and seers, the words that communicate peace and harmony and compassion. And yet our lines that are drawn where the churches will go fall along a certain color line. And I get it. You know, many churches and many denominations were established during times where the lines of division were purely related to color and race. But it's 2020 and we still have these same lines. So does that mean we're maintaining them? Because we certainly didn't forget them. If we are going to be the sharp end of the spear, and we're going to be the trailblazers, we're going to be the pathfinders, we're going to be, because we have this spiritual enlightenment, if that's who we are, then our bodies, i.e. behaviors, need to be congruent with that belief system. If I believe that we're all equal, if I believe that whatever the deity that to whom I pay homage, sees us all the same, then I need to demonstrate that in my own behaviors. If I'm driving in traffic and I see something on the back of your car or on your car that indicates, oh my gosh, we go to the same church or the same synagogue or the same temple, the same blah, 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 and then I see another sticker on your car that supports or promotes something or someone that's completely contrary to, now I got questions. And it's the system part. I can't be saving and spending out of the same pot at the same time and be one or the other. It doesn't work that way. I can't do it. I can't walk east and west at the same time. What do you believe? And if you're involved in any organizations or any systems that are not congruent, you got to think about that. Because if the doctrine says one thing, but what's being told you, what's being taught to you, what's being demonstrated and emulated is something different, then now you have decisions to make. Because I've been part of many organizations where the mission statements and the objectives and those things resonated with me, and I was good with that. But the people playing it out, it's not a choice to make. Am I going to stay and represent the mission statement and the objectives is the nature of what I'm seeing in the people and the employees such that I can't, or can I be an example, right? Or do I have the capacity, depending upon the role or the timing of me being involved in this organization or denomination, is it such where I can um, demonstrate my beliefs and move around? Or is it going to be a situation where it's going to come to a decision? I had to make that decision as it related to my spiritual environments because of systems. The system, for some of them, did not lend itself to conversation. The system, for a couple of these places of spirituality, did not provide a safe place to have this discussion. Because I tried to have the discussion. I tried to have the discussion for two reasons. One, I wanted to make sure that I understood. And two, I understood that I could have it wrong. What I'm seeing and experiencing may not be the totality of the situation. And so I don't want to make a decision, say, I'm not coming here, I'm done with this because of a situation that I misunderstood or for which I didn't have all the information. So I asked the questions and I went through the chain of command. And I was met with non-answers. I was met with, well, that's just the way it is. Like, I mean, you have to believe, sister. I'm asking you a question. Believe what? I'm asking a question, right? And I recognize that my belief system is not the same for everybody. My belief system, I feel like I was granted the ability and the blessing to reason. And so I'm not going to dismiss it. Now, there will be times where I feel like reason has to be married with something else, depending on the situation and nature of the topic. But just in general, I'm not going to outright suspend my critical thinking. I can't do that. I won't do that. And I don't see the need for it, right? But my point for saying that is if I'm in an environment and the system or the tenets or the doctrine or the dogma is not consistent with what we're doing and saying, then I have decisions to make. And that's what I saw. I saw the microaggressions as it related to age. Young people wanting to be involved and having ideas and being, well, you're just a kid, or having concerns or being upset or passionate about something, and then the response being less than positive, centered around their age. How old was Jesus when he started preaching in the temple? And I'm saying Jesus because that was the setting. That was the in the example I just gave. It was a church where Jesus was worshipped, and so I was like, we could have handled that a little differently. Even if the answer is no, there's a way to do it with respect, dignity, and compassion toward the individual. I would sit in churches and some of the churches that I belong to and listen to the children's story. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it was like a horror. I was like, this is a horror show. Like this, and of the point being obedience. And I'm like, oh, gosh. As it relates to race, as it relates to age, as it relates to sex, microaggressions in church, as it relates to what you're wearing. Oh, okay, well, you gotta, okay, well, I don't see your needs this today. I saw her come in. Her stomach looks a little big. Is she married or is she pregnant? Child. Yes, that's gossip. But what happens? The stigma of being pregnant and not married, or pregnant and young. The stigma of being uncertain about your sexuality or exploring your sexuality in the sense of trying to figure out, I know that I'm different, blah, blah, blah. The stigma of maybe being in an interracial couple, the stigma of having something affecting your mood and affect that you can't control mental health. And the microaggressions that happen around those topics leave people feeling unsafe. And I can say this because I've been a member of several churches and have watched people from the LGBTQI community leave, and no one knew that they were a member of the LGBTQI community, IA, sorry, um, because no one took the time to get to know them, because they knew that there was something about them that was different. And I'm not sitting with her, or I'm not going to hang around him in church. They left. I may not feel safe in a safe place because domestic violence may not be taken seriously in my spiritual organization, because child abuse may not be taken seriously in my organization. And we have these conversations about sparing the rod and spoiling the child, and that's not even what that verse means. And we have child abuse happening right in our congregation. And safe places aren't safe. They begin to cease being safe when there's no collaboration, there's no communication, and there's no awareness, and there's no connection with the constituents or the congregation or whatever the name is for the people that come to your place of spirituality or worship. We come with our own stuff. We come with our own issues. We come with our own history. And that's fine. We bring who we are. But if the idea in these situations and settings is for us to be a center and space and place of peace and safety, that means we need to understand who we are in this space. I need to make sure that I recognize that we're coming ideally and for the same reason from different places. So if I'm coming for support, if I'm coming to be fed and you're coming to be fed, all right, great. You may use a fork, I may use my hands. Is that gonna be a problem? And if it is, let's have that conversation. Coming in, and I'm using eating as an analogy, but if we're coming to the same space for the same or similar reasons from different places, it would behoove those in charge who are responsible for maintaining the safe space to recognize, okay, we may need to have some conversations about how we interact with this and our viewpoint on this, so that even if I have to say something that's difficult to say, even if I have to share some truth that may not feel too good to you, I'm going to do it in a way that holds these three pillars: sound and safe, dignity, respect, compassion. Because I've studied many different philosophies over the years. And all of the ones that I've studied specifically have different deities or different, higher spiritualities or divine or deities or whatever. But the ones that I've studied are based on those three things. Those are three main concepts inside those religious and spiritual beliefs: dignity, compassion, respect. I can discipline my children with dignity, respect, and compassion. And here's why. Because I don't want robots. There are times when I can't always explain, nor should I have to as a parent. But recognizing that these beings that I call children have the same reason that I have, the same ability to reason that I have, and may have questions just like I did. The question is questioning me, that's different. But if the question is to understand it, you can tell the difference. It would behoove me to provide that information. But the key is a relationship. If I want a relationship with you, I recognize that there's going to be a give and take, and I'm not always going to be right. You're not always going to be wrong. But right and wrong is not the end of the game. Coming to this space of peace, coming to this space of safety where I'm going to say what I need to say, you're going to say what you need to say in a safe space, to where I get, even if you say something that's going to be hard for me to hear, I understand that you're not trying to hurt me. But then we have people in place in case you are. right? Whoa, wait, take the time out. You go here, you go. Now let's come back, right? I don't mean like police that hold us, it'll be like this punitive thing. No, I mean people that will help us navigate if it's a situation where emotions are running high. But my point is the relationship. If the goal and the focus is to maintain and sustain a healthy, positive relationship, then where do microaggressions fit in? If the relationship is the goal and the key and the focus, then dignity, respect, and compassion won't be that big of a stretch to understand why those are the big pieces, right? If the relationship is what I is my focus with my kids, then the discipline is going to follow that. And if you don't get what I'm saying, and you've played sports, what did your coach have to say to you to get you to do what he or she wanted you to do? Yeah. Well, and I know some of y'all are like, well, I wanted to play, so I just did what he said. Okay. But if I asked you who your favorite teacher was, or asked you who at school, who's a lot of times it's the PE teacher, a lot of times it's the coach. Because the dynamic of that relationship is different. And generally the coach is listening. If the relationship matters, then what matters to you is going to matter to me, even if I don't understand it. Because it's important to you, it's going to be important to me. If dignity is important to you, I'm not going to want to say some nonsense about your hair, your face, or your age, or your race, or your sex, or your gender. If I see you as one, if this place of safety, and I recognize this as a place of safety, and I appreciate this as a place of safety, I'm going to promote it as a place of safety, and I'm going to do my part to keep it safe, which means what comes out of here. When safe places are not safe, and that includes the church, we have to really look at tenets of what we have agreed and accepted to believe and how that resonates with our bottom line of why we want to go to this place and be a part of this organization. And then, like I had to do, review the systems. Like, is this a system? Like, is it a systemic issue? Is this something that is not going to change because it's part of the structure? And what are the mechanisms in place for change? Because systems evolve, right? We evaluate our systems, and do we still need this? Can we change this? How can we make this more effective? How do we make this bigger? How do we make this grow? Is there a mechanism inside the system that allows for this conversation? Because sometimes there are that have those conversations. But at the end of it, if your safety is what's important, if you don't feel quite safe, and let me be clear, I didn't feel unsafe personally in the spiritual environments that I left. I felt unsafe for other people because I was listening to stuff that was being told and taught, and I'm reading, and I'm like, that's not what it says. So hold on, I want to be clear. And I said this to somebody. It happened to be a conservative church that I was attending, and I said, hold up. Am I getting in trouble for hanging around the same people that Jesus did? I'll wait. Because being kind is not the same as association in the sense of these are my best friends because I'm being kind to someone, or because I'm not going to exclude someone because of their lifestyle. I'm not going to do it. But now you're seeing me and assuming something. I can't be part of that. And so I left. Because advocacy and congruence is important to me. Safe spaces, safe places, when they're not safe, you really have some decisions to make. And I would encourage you, if you find yourself in a situation like that, to do due diligence. Don't just assume that, it's not safe. Look and see. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's a reason. But before you make a decision to, my suggestion would be, before you make a decision to separate yourself, hopefully you use the same kind of decision making that you utilized to when you decided to join this organization. Hopefully you did due diligence, but make sure you have all the information. Make sure you understand. make sure you've explored the options to gain clarity regarding whatever was happening. All right. I want to remind you that we, on Thursday, November 19th, 2020, we will continue this theme when safe places aren't safe. And the topic will be organization mission statements, bylaws, and behaviors. So, i.e., microaggressions at work. That's not the topic, but we're going to get into what kinds of things cause us to feel unsafe in the safety, as safe as our work or organizational environments can be. What are those things, and how do we handle that? All right. So as always, be kind to yourself that you may be kind to others, and speak life. See you soon.